To our school board meeting, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'd like to welcome our guests that are here today. I don't see, we have no one in the audience, so I'm guessing we don't have a need for translation. So we will move forward and with an approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
Okay, a motion was made by Director Schutte and seconded by Director Lemus. Right? Sorry, I didn't see. We'll move on to item, sorry, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Thank you. We've approved the agenda. This is my first time, guys, okay? We'll move on to board development and linkage. I don't know what we have there. What do we got? Sorry, my bad. We have no public comment. Now we're going to move on to board member discussion.
Ken's not here, so there's no legislative.
We've got no legislative report, no discussion. Did anybody have anything?
Do we want to talk about the admin retreat?
Pete, are you good to talk about that right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think for me, I know that we were just in the interest of time and we were trying to start our regular board meeting, but I did want to just share something that Pete shared at the beginning, that yes, the data is not exactly where we want it, but we feel confident that we have the right people in place to make a difference. And that's how I felt in every single presentation from every school site, the high school, middle school, all the elementary schools, pre-K. It was just, it was good. It was awesome to see that they're all very different, but yet the same. You know, they're all with the one goal in mind of putting the students first. But there is definitely work that needs to be done, and it's really awesome to see that they recognize that and they own it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the enthusiasm of all of the staff, all the admin, it's just right there. So I'm excited for a new year.
Yeah.
I think it was really helpful to see all of the different schools under the same framework and lens. Not in a comparison way, but just to see where different ones are excelling so that they know exactly where to focus their attentions moving forward, so that we get all district-wide, our students kind of onto the same page, because every school has somewhere a little bit different that they need to focus on. And that, to me, was the most helpful piece of it.
So I had a couple of takeaways. First, I want to apologize for being late to the admin meeting. There were circumstances outside of my control. My first takeaway is I wish we had more time. And I know that that time crunch was because of me. So I apologize, but I wish we had more time to spend with the admin outside of just their presentations, but an opportunity to interact a little bit more between our groups, and I would have loved to have been able to debrief with them after it was over. Again, my fault. What I loved, I also loved the framework, Kelly, that you were talking about, that Pete, I'm sure you gave them, of here's how I want you to present your information. It was great. It was also very eye-opening in many ways as to just hearing it laid out in like very layman's terms for us to understand when it's, you know, 1 out of 10 students are at grade level. And alarming in the fact of like we have so much work to do, and what things are we doing right, what things are we doing wrong, and you guys, you're on the right trajectory as far as I could tell, as holding people accountable and really getting. Sometimes when you say things out loud, it just puts it in a whole new focus versus knowing something and then saying it out loud. And today it felt like it was said out loud in front of the board, in front of peers, in front of our superintendent, in front of all of us, so that we can celebrate the good and also know that there's a lot of work to do and to be done. But I love having this kind of collaboration because it doesn't happen very often where we're all in the same room together. So I, again, apologize that we weren't able to meet for a longer time because I would have really loved that. Anything else on the admin retreat?
No, I just think bringing accountability to all of it for those teachers. I mean, the data is not where any of us want it to be right now, but to have to come here and say to the board, look, this is where we are. We recognize that's not where we want to be, and this is where we're going and how we're going to try and get there. All of that brings accountability to the whole district and to us too, to know where they're going and how they're trying to get there so that we can help in any way that we can too.
Yeah. And Pete, one thing that I really appreciate that you do is if it ever feels like someone's kind of blowing past things, good or bad, you always will circle back to that information to say, like, either this is a big deal and we do need to get somewhere with it, or this was a huge accomplishment and we do need to celebrate it. So I always appreciate your feedback after each of the principals go, because whether it's something I was already thinking or it was something that I hadn't thought of, I always gain something from that. So I appreciate that.
I think that's what I've always appreciated about you too, is the fact that when we do these site visits, the insight that you give back for us has opened up my eyes a lot of things
Yes.
that you don't know, and it's really helpful.
Very helpful.
So helpful. So thank you.
Yeah. None of us are teachers by trade or principals or in education. So you've done a great job
Yeah.
in at least educating myself
Me too.
and the rest of the board in what good instruction looks like and what to look for when we're not seeing it, and have been a great teacher to us. So thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate that. I know we were just stepped out for 2 or 3 minutes, but that was actually one of the points I wanted to share with the administrators. It's when I do say something in front of the board, it's for you, not for them.
Yeah.
And that because I've been around you more frequently than they have, I have an understanding of what might be a misconception to you or something that you've learned in the past that I can try and help connect. I really think that's my role for them. So it's not always easy to say those things, but I appreciate you acknowledging that. I also want to acknowledge Jessica Shank and John for helping develop the template for the PowerPoint and the way we've been thinking through that work. It's also how we're processing our work with Dr. Campbell in strategic planning. Those slides that you saw are the slides we sent her. So it allowed the principals to feel like the work is coherent. We're going to stay in a certain structure, and you'll see them resurface as we move into strategic planning as well.
Yeah.
So I have two more things really quickly. One, I really wanted to say this about Little Kaga, but I'm super excited to see the
Agreed.
changes that are going to be made. Their presentation, I just felt like she had a fire lit under her. So I'm super, super excited to see the growth that there's going to be in that school. But other than that, one thing that I just kind of thought of, our first school board site visit is in September. What school are we going to?
Wajitas. I think it's Wajitas.
So, just thinking ahead, because when he mentioned, oh, you know, you guys are going to be coming here soon to our school site, I love the idea of, I mean, it's not, we're going to go hit all the schools, but is there any way that we can maybe visit some of the schools that like at the end of the year that we visited in the beginning of the school year? Because he's doing some things that I really want to see at the end of the school year and what the effect was. Like, for example, they're going to be doing the loop. And so they're barely going to be starting it at the beginning of the school year. We're going to go ahead and see it in the first couple of weeks of school, but I don't know. I would love to see it again at the end of the school year and see what the effect is. But that's just me.
Yeah, one of the things I shared with the administrators, you guys are hitting on all the points. One of the other pieces I shared was, hey, there's some board members in there that really paid attention to what you say when you get up there, and they remember. So next time you're in front of them, circle back to it. Share with them your progress. That's a piece of accountability. Know that they're going to come asking. So we'll look to create some opportunities like that. I would expect that next year around this time or in the spring when we're reporting out about how the year went, we would use a similar framework and bring some of those key items back up. But certainly for me in superintendent informational items or in board member discussions, if you bring those things to me throughout the year, say, hey, in August, you guys talked about this. Could at one of the upcoming board meetings, could we get an update around that? That would be helpful for us as well.
Great. Anything else on the admin retreat? Okay, moving on to our student rep reports. Jaden, do you have something?
Of course I do. Of course I do. So, if you guys remember from the last time I was here, which was so long ago, I'm very sorry about that, by the way. July was a month. It was a month. But from my last meeting when I was here, I talked about the fight for student mental health. And I was thinking about how we can incorporate that with Cookies for Convo. Like, you guys can come up with some questions, like at least one question, and we can talk about what to ask the students, or just focus, like how we focused belonging that last time. We can focus this on your mental health, on what the school board, what the teachers, what the admin can do for your mental health. Like what is there that is making your, like, it's just your flare-ups, you know? Like, sometimes it's just seasonal depression. Sometimes people don't feel the same in the summer. Sometimes people don't feel the same in the winter. And so I just think it's a good way to figure out how they're feeling and what we can do as adults or as peers, as people that they can trust in their life. Yeah, and I'm very excited to keep Gael's dream of Cookies and Combo in order. And I'm very excited for this next school year. But I'm going to get in contact with the principals at OHS, DOHS, and MMS to set up dates pretty soon. So I just wanted to let you guys in on what I was planning on doing.
Great. Moving on to C1, the required approvals.
I motion to approve the required approvals.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have received a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Moving on to item C2, accounts payable warrants 2.
I motion to approve accounts payable warrants too.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Sorry. Moving on to item C3, superintendent informational items.
We're excited to have our folks from Finance, Executive Director of Business Services, Amy Suarez, Angie Garza, and Lori Taff here to share with you the budget presentation for this next school year. So we'll turn it over to Amy and her team.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am here to give you guys a summary of the 23-24 budget. The full 239-page budget is on our website for anybody who's interested, but for now, I will just give you a summary of what's on there. As Pete said, I have Angie Garza, my lead fiscal coordinator, and my fiscal coordinator, Lori Taff, who's also helped me with some pieces of putting the budget together. So, on page 2, we have the district administration. First, we have the board of directors. Kelly Camp, Sharon Schutte, Ken Johnson, Lindsay, and Talia Limas. They are in charge of approving the budget. And then the district administration, Dr. Pete Perez, Jessica Schenk, Amy Suarez, and Sandra Villarreal. We implement, the superintendent implements the board policy and directives, and we help them to manage the day-to-day operations of the budget. Budget timelines. We start around March, and we begin working with that and trying to do our audit at the same time. One of the things that we work on in March is, as early as we can, we try to do the enrollment projections, because that's gonna drive what our staffing needs are. We're also going through negotiations and then keeping an eye on what the legislatives are doing and any updates that will affect our budget for the coming year. By July 10th, we did have our preliminary budget available to the public. And then on August 14th, we're doing the budget presentation. And then this week and next week, we will have a legal ad out saying that on August 28th is our budget hearing and adoption of the budget. Okay, what is a budget? A budget is a value statement. It helps us develop a sound operating budget so that we can forecast and set spending limits. It gives us the opportunity to have internal controls, and we continuously monitor our spending district-wide. Know that we are the last ones that look at all the expenditures, and we're making sure that we always have internal controls in place. We create an alignment of our budget with our values. We comply with all local, state, and federal mandates. We have to follow the OSPI requirements. We maintain our district programs. And then we also set expectations, and we hold ourselves responsible for the highest standards of integrity, learning, fiscal responsibility, and always being transparent to our community. Some of the, sorry if I sound a little tired. I went to a Mariners game, and my voice is really tired from all the screaming. School finance lingo, some of the words you'll be hearing today is budget. We just described what that is. It's just a tool. It's, you know, we try to our very best to project what we're gonna get in revenues and expenditures. Projection is we use our current expenditures for the current year and try to determine what we're going to be getting for the following year. And then we take into account what does the district need. And then ESSER. ESSER is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, aka COVID dollars. IPD is implicit price deflator. That's the amount that OSPI puts increases our salary allocations and our MSOCs. This year, the salaries went up 3.7%, and the MSOCs went up 3.1%. What is MSOCs? It's miscellaneous supplies and operating costs, such as supplies, travel, and other services.
Really
Oh.
quick, Amy, so that would mean that a teacher's salary would increase 6.8%? Do you
No.
combine those two numbers?
No, MSOCs is, so if they determine that each student is eligible for $8,000 in material supplies and operating costs, they increase that amount the following year by the 3.1%.
Oh,
That's
okay.
just for the MSOCs, the
Okay.
material supplies and operating costs. The teacher, the allocations for the teachers went up 3.7%,
Okay,
salaries as a whole,
okay,
of the
Thank you.
funded positions.
okay, perfect, thank you.
We all know who OSPI is. A new term this year, but it's not new to us. We had to have a transitional kindergarten program. The legislation took action this year, and they changed the program to transition to kinder. So now we're going from TK to TTK. And one of the biggest changes this year is the previous 2 years when we implemented, they would be counted as kinder numbers, and they would be funded like a kinder student. This year, we're going to have to have their enrollment separate, and then the way that they determine how much we're getting in funding was a tool. So they gave us a tool to complete, and then from that, we were able to see how much we would get for the TK program. Based on that tool and the projection of the 48 students, we're going to get $543,000 for this program. And then anything that isn't used for the program this year, we have to save it in fund balance to be used in the coming year, but only on TTK.
Oh, Amy catches her breath there for a moment. I want to provide or amplify two things. One is the slide that talked about a budget as a value statement. I think it's important to acknowledge the finance team again for the history of outstanding audits, and that was certainly the case again this year. Lots of positive feedback from the state auditors on the quality of their work. And those ideas about fiscal responsibility and transparency, I think, is a real highlight for our school district. The other one, I do want to step back to the IPD just for a second and maybe put it into layman's terms around, so let's say you own a construction company and the prototypical funding model for a company your size of 20 employee, you get 20 employees, but you actually employ 25 because you do some other things and you're just in making that investment in your company. And then maybe the parent company says, hey, we're going to give you a 3.7% increase in funding, but it's only going to be for those 20. For the other 5, you have to pick that up. It's very same for the school district. So this idea about 3.7 actually translates into an actual number, an amount to a school district, and it doesn't cover all of the employees that we have.
Thank you, Pete.
We make up for that with levy money?
Yes, levy and the LEA portion of it.
Okay.
Okay, so the introduction to funds is just basically just saying we have 5 funds and who's responsible. We already went through, the board's responsible for approving it, and then we try to manage as best as we can. And like Pete said, we are always being audited on those funds and making sure that we're following policies. And then the next page, the 5 district funds, we have the general fund, and that's the big one. That one is financed from all local, state, and federal sources. It's where most of the stuff happens from our school district, like anything that has to do with instructing our students, it comes from this fund. Salaries, benefits, food service, maintenance, technology, and pupil transportation. The capital projects fund is where we have to put big things in there for our buildings, like land acquisitions, major facility additions, remodeling, and major repairs. So you will see here that we will be transferring $3 million from the general fund to the district, to the capital projects fund, because that's where these things have to happen. The ORTC parking lot repair, the new portables at the OHS and Scootney, the boilers, the counseling center, and other repairs. We have to put those in the expenditures have to come from the capital projects fund. So we have to transfer the money that we were going to spend on that from the general fund to the capital projects. The debt service fund is where we get we have to pay for the bond that was approved in 2007. And you'll see there that the balance on that as of 9/1 is $11,580,000.
Amy, when does that mature?
2027.
Thank you.
Mhm. The ASB fund, that's for kids, by our kids, for things for their student activities. And then the transportation vehicle fund, that is money, we get funding from the state for depreciation of our buses. And then from there, we have to buy, if there's any major bus repairs, and then all the purchases of the buses come from the transportation. And we will continue to transfer the $150,000, just like we did last year, into the transportation, because the prices of our buses have increased. So we just want to make sure there's always enough money, because OSPI will fund us a depreciation, but if we have a major breakdown, they won't do it. So. Okay, the next page has all 5 funds and what we will be asking you to approve for appropriations. In the general fund, it'll be $87,582,000. Capital projects, $3 million. Debt service, $2.5 million. ASB, $465,000. And then the transportation vehicle fund, $550,000. Okay. And then what are the budget initiatives, the major changes that are for this coming year is that we will continue with the ESSER funding, but this will be the last year that you will see that in our budget. All that needs to be spent no later than September of 2024. We have planned carryover of funds in our special programs. So if there's carryover, like for example, SPED is projected to have about 500,000 from this school year that they're not spending, we can carry it over to the next coming school year. We'll continue to support our facility needs, and like I explained earlier, that's with the transfer from the general fund to the capital projects. Continue to support our technology initiatives. We will continue with the transition to kinder program. Our enrollment is going to be the same. We have increased and decreased the staff where needed. The special education funding has increased this year. They increased our numbers there. And then one of the big things this year, and it'll play a role in some of the other numbers down in the next slides, and I'll point those out, but the teacher retirement system, the rates on that decreased by 5.01%. So to put that in perspective, when you see in the other slides how much we're spending in certificated benefits, that would have been 1.7 million if the interest rate on the retirement would have stayed the same. So, the categorical funding, which is the state and federal grants, is projected to be about 1% less than last year, and it will not keep up with the salary increases. You guys have any questions on that?
So it is going up, this last categorical funding, just not as much as last year, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
Some of the impacts from the legislative things that passed is, like we've already spoken, the IPD increasing to 3.7%.
Amy, if I could just,
Not increasing. Last year was 5.5, this year is 3.7.
I just want to, your question about the increase, and, you know, I'm trying to put myself in legislator shoes and thinking, we have all these school districts and entities that received the ESSER funding that haven't spent it. You know, we sent them all that funding. Is this, you know, a time where they're going to take a breather and say, we're not going to increase it a bunch. We're just going to leave it flat, see what happens, and then decide after that. And I think that unpredictability and unknown of what the next couple of years are going to look like is making everyone nervous.
Yes, definitely. Also, like I previously said, the special education funding, a couple of things that came through the ledge is that the increase in multiplier rates from 1.0075 to 1.12, which that did equal increased dollars to our school system. They also increased the cap on the student enrollment from 13.5 to 15, but that didn't really give us extra dollars since we are at 12.29. So 12.29 of our students are special education. Had it been more, and then our funding for that would have increased. ESSER funding, like I said, this will be the last year that you see that in our budget. SEB, which is our medical insurance premiums, they increased by 7%. So now we paying $1,100 per funded FTE. So the state gives us $1,100 for the ones that are funded, and then we have to pay for the ones that are unfunded. And then also for any substitutes that work more than 630 hours a year, we have to pay for their medical insurance. We continue to get 3 funded days for our teachers of professional development. One of the days for 23-24 will need to be used for cultural competency, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we will continue to save any money that's not used. So if the state gives us a certain pot of money, if we don't use that on training for the teachers, we have to save that on fund balance for the upcoming school years. And then for PSCS, the physical, social, and emotional support, if you guys remember last year, they put that in place, and it was gonna be phased over 3 years. So this year, we got a little bit of an increase, and in the slide coming, we'll show you where the increase wasn't as much as we were expecting. But we do meet compliance, and we will continue to meet compliance in 23-24. K3 size compliance, our kinder through third grade enrollment is projected to decrease again for a total decrease of 102 students since this program started in 1920 school year. The K3 specialists that we still have will continue to be paid out of ESSER so that we can maximize our BA funding to maintain classroom size. And we'll get into that in the next couple of slides.
Amy, if I could touch on the physical, social, and emotional support staff, and again, back to your budget demonstrating your values, the additional funding that we set aside for the counseling project at McFarland Middle School and adjusting that area and providing a better model for our middle school students and the hiring of an additional counselor is directly tied to these kinds of funds and the district trying to be responsive to what the building and the students tell us they need, particularly in regards to student mental health.
Yes, good one. So this next slide shows last year's calculation, how we ended the year, and then this one, the bottom portion is my projection for next year. So you will see that, and I know, I'm sorry, it's kind of small, the enrollment for this year was 4,170, and the state funded us for 20.682 positions in this, and that's for, counselors, nurses, social workers, and psychologists. And we currently have 27.688 FTEs in those positions. So we met compliance and we're over what they fund us for. For next year, our enrollment will go down to 4163, and we'll get into more details of that in a bit. And the state will increase our our staffing units to 20.833 based on that. And we did increase by, like Pete said, by 1 counselor and 1 security officer. So now we'll have 29.688 staffing units. So we will meet compliance.
Okay, so, sorry,
That's
I need some clarification. Does this mean that the state funds us 20 staffing units, but we have to fund ourselves 8.8, so almost 9 staffing units we have to fund ourselves?
Yes. So prototypical school, they'll fund us, and it's broken down by elementary, middle, and high school. That's what they tell us that we qualify for, or what they fund us for the prototypical funding model, and then the green one shows what we actually have.
Okay, so we're funding as a district almost 9 full-time employees
In these
that are
categories.
not state funded, just locally funded.
Correct.
Okay,
And this meeting compliance just means we need to be at least at what the state funds us for or
Correct.
above, is
Yeah.
that,
Correct.
okay.
So if our numbers would have been 19 instead of 29, we would have not been in compliance. We would have had to hire 1 more to be in compliance.
so we're above the state average,
The state
Oh.
funded amount.
the state funded amount, okay.
So K3 enrollment, I wanted to show what our K3 funding, our enrollment has been doing since 17-18. You will see that in 17-18, we had 1,448 students in those grade levels. And we are projected to have 1,242 for every year it's been decreasing. So in 1920, when K3 when OSPI started funding us for the K-3 to be fully funded for 17 students per classroom, we were at 1,404 students in those grade levels. When we hired the 10 positions for the K-3, they based it on, the decision was based on the enrollment from the 18-19 school year, which was 1,441. So if you can see the difference between the 19-20 school year and what I'm projecting for next year, that's a decrease of 162 students. And you divide that by 17, and that's 10 staffing units. So currently, we do have, we have pivoted, and we have, to keep our classroom sizes the same, we have been funding those positions the past couple of years with our ESSER dollars. So,
ESSER runs out at some point, though.
This year. Yeah. So in thinking about those numbers and the conversation we had with the administrators and some of the things they're working on, you know, the board and the community and the schools are going to have to get in conversations about, you know, we have 4 second, 4 third, 4 fourth, 4 fifth, right? It just, we march through in this pattern. If we don't have the kids, we don't have that need. And so what does that do to a professional learning community and a team when you say, hey, we're not going to fill that position? You know, much of this we can do through attrition and retirement and resignation and that kind of thing. But those are the kinds of conversations we have to begin to prepare ourselves for. And ESSER, I think Amy's going to highlight this in a bit. ESSER has helped us. She's used the term a couple times with me. We've kicked that can down the road a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
Other districts have not been as fortunate, but our turn is coming.
Yeah.
so the next slide shows our K-3 compliance. So this is based on the new enrollment numbers for 23-24 of 1,242 students. If you put that in, in the calculator that OSPI has, our demonstrated class size is 16.43. So if you remember, to have the maximum amount of funding, we need that number to be 17 to maximize our funding. So 17, in order to do that, we would have to have 75.824 teaching positions. And so that means that we are over 2.6 teachers in K-3, even though we have 4 K-3 specialists being paid out of ESSER. Had it not been with that, that number would have been a lot bigger than the $315,000 that it
Yeah.
shows on that.
So then this for me then goes kind of back to our admin meeting, and then it's like, okay, if it's one thing to, I guess, to go back to the construction analogy, it's one thing to pay out of pocket for those 5 employees if we're building 10 extra houses a year and making a lot of money. But if we're paying for those 5 employees and we're getting the same result as if we didn't have those 5 extra employees, it's really hard to justify that money. It's really hard to justify that money.
Yeah, that's the accountability of. I think that was an excellent way to put it. It doesn't land well, but it was a
Yeah.
really good way to put it.
Yeah.
So really this year, we need to maximize our ESSER funding and really take advantage. I mean, that might not be the best word, but really maximize, right?
Yeah, and I think you're going to see in the budget that that's exactly what they've done. And then how do you know, if I'm a building principal thinking about this next school year, how's this next school year going to go? That our role as central office folks in communicating to the board is we need to be thinking 2 or 3 years down the road, because this is what's coming. And as a principal, it's easy to tune that out for a year. And to get people to unlearn that, can we get the same outcomes or better outcomes with fewer folks?
Yeah.
That's really what is hitting everyone across the state.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, you know, there might be some staff that have a little bit of extra support right now. It's gonna be, you know, kind of a learning curve for them, or they also need to have a really good understanding that where the funding's coming from and, you know, the difference that it can make.
And our role as a board is to answer to the community. And it's really hard to say, you need to pony up extra money when for the last 3 years, we're showing the same test result scores. We're showing that 1 out of 10 students can read. But we still need this money to justify this extra staff when we aren't having the results to necessarily justify the spending.
So am I reading this right, that without ESSER, it would be almost $500,000, right, to cover these extra staff people?
Correct, so the 2.6 that we're over as of now would be 315,000. And then, if we were paying the 4 K3 specialists from BEA, that would have been, well, we're paying them under ESSER, that's another 483,000 on top of that, because that would have made.
So that's added to the 350?
Yes.
Yes.
So
almost
it's,
800,000.
yes.
So almost $800,000.
So the total teachers, there's the 78.431, that does not include the 4 K3 teachers that were originally paid out of basic ed, that we're paying out of ESSER.
So yeah, like Lindsay said, if we don't get improved outcomes this year, then how do we justify
Yeah.
almost $1 million for extra staff people to try and make it happen?
And this is just K3, right?
Yes.
This is
Yeah.
just what we're spending in K3, trying to get our test scores in K3 to get our kids where we need them to be. So this isn't even K12. This is just K3. Almost, yeah, $800,000. Yikes.
We may have talked about this in previous meetings, but are we funding any additional staff with the ESSER dollars from 4th to 12th?
Yes, we're getting some fourth
Yeah.
grade teachers. So that goes back to Talia, we went to our WASBO conference, and they said, spend your ESSER money. You know, we had these big projects planned and capital projects, and they said, spend your money in payroll, and then pivot, pay it out of payroll, and then transfer your money to capital projects for the big things. You know, that way, what happened is in capital projects, we didn't have the budget capacity. So now, how do I explain this?
So transfer funds.
So now we have to have the transfer so that we can put in capital projects, and it's just the way the accounting worked out. It's better to have in payroll, because we can claim, we're gonna pay for it anyways at basic ed, now we're paying at ESSER. We can claim the money, have the money, then transfer it into capital projects, and the money's already there for whenever the project is complete. And we're not having to claim that project, it's already.
It's just general fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Later in this budget report, Amy, are you gonna talk about 4 through 12 in our overages of teacher payments? No.
I don't have that information. I know I brought it to our executive team, and we are over a little bit in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and that's how I justified in the 22-23 school year to pay some of our 4th and 5th grade teachers out of ESSER. Not
Okay.
all of them, but a couple.
Some of them, okay.
It's much easier to predict, at least this has been my experience in the middle and high school, because those cohorts stay together, you know who's coming. The kinder numbers the last couple of years have been what has shaken the system a bit, on top of accelerated costs, right? We're paying more for things, including people. What we're seeing across the state of Washington are school districts, again, who are dealing with 10 or 15% cuts, and is it 85% of school districts' budgets are around personnel?
Mhm.
So if you're going to save any money, it's really around people. And the other side of this, I think, for a board member to think about is, you know, are there going to be additional revenues? Is the state going to amp up what they contribute, and will that allow us to preserve some of the experiences we want to create for students and staff?
Is some of this decrease in the kinder enrollment because of how the counting is different now with TTKs, not kinder kids anymore,
No,
right?
so-
They're different?
We will get to that when we get
Okay,
into the.
okay,
So I took the TK out.
okay.
Yeah, we think there's from your world, a healthcare response to that question.
Yeah. Where are the kids, and why aren't they having any?
Yeah.
So we're gonna get into enrollment now, and you see why. It's okay. So enrollment's important because we end up with our enrollment number. And then that enrollment number tells the state what the prototypical funding staffing units are. And that in turn tells them how much we get in salary and benefits and how much we get in MSOP funding. So everything that's in our budget is based on student enrollment. So how did we enroll for next year? We did a conservative roll-up. So the first graders for the actuals of 22-23 rolled into second grade. We just did the roll-up. So every year, it's the kindergartners, the unknown. Initially, I had budgeted 320, and then we had kinder enrollment and realized that our numbers were way down. So I adjusted the budget, and our kinder enrollment is going to be 290. As of the last kinder roundup, we only have 269 kindergartners registered, but we usually get quite a bit more right when school starts. So we're hoping to get to the 290. So we'll see how close we get. Total, we are budgeting 7 less FTEs than the 22-23 school year. And that has to do with the kinder numbers. And then, like I said previously, under the new TTK law, those numbers have to be separate from the kinders. And then we're gonna have a 99 student drop in elementary students, 33 student increase at McFarland, and a 59 increase at the high school in Desert Oasis. So in the next slide, you will see how we ended the year, the 4,470 students, and where we budgeted. So you can see that we actually had 29 more students than we budgeted, which is a 0.06. So almost spot on. Those students at 9,418 per basic ed student, that was the total increase in our revenues for 22-23 of 273,000. So you can see we don't want to budget too high and we don't want to budget too low. So in the next slide, we take our final 22-23 average, and then we roll it up, and then we end up with what we're going to budget for this school year. It's going to be 4,463 students. So that's a net decrease of 7. And then in the next page, it's more of a just for historical purposes. In 22-23 and in 21-22, the TK students were counted with our kinders, but I went back and I adjusted the slides so that we could separate it so you guys could see the difference. Initially, the TK students were budgeted at 50, and we did have to decrease that to 48 because they're not in school. It's how long they are in school. I think they only go Tuesday through Friday, so they're not a full FTE. And then the next slide, that one doesn't have the numbers, but you can see the first one is the 9-10 and how we've increased, except for 21-22 where we took the dip because of COVID. So I went to a business managers meeting a couple of weeks ago, and this information is one that they gave us there. And it just kind of say, we're all in the same boat. This is, enrollment's been anything but normal. And statewide, we were down 4.8% since the 1920 school year. And then this is for Kelly. So this year's kindergartners were born in 2018 and 2019. And then if you look at I went on to the Adams County website, and if you can see, and of course this is all of Adams County, you can see that in 2020, the birth rate went down to 328 compared to 380 and 384. So we could take a really huge dip next year. But I'm not budgeting that way. I'm hoping the kids show up.
Yeah. It's just surprising knowing how quickly our community is growing in every aspect. It seems like we have no housing, and every time there's a rental, it's like never on the market for more than a day, it seems like. So it's just surprising that we're in such need of housing, but our student enrollment isn't necessarily showing that. I mean, when you go back a decade, it's definitely grown in the last 10 years, but
Yeah, I
not in the last 2 or 3.
think I put in, our kinder enrollment for the previous 14 years, not including 23, 24, if you were to average it out, was 354.
Wow.
So
And now we're at 269, hopefully 290.
hopefully 290.
Come on, young people, where are the
I can
babies
tell
at?
you, we have more babies than that every year. I mean, we have high 300s, low 400s as far as babies every year here, so I don't know where they're going.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of thought, okay, how's enrollment for kinder at 269? Where it can't be. And then I look at Adams County, I'm like, well, maybe it is dipping. So.
I mean, there used to be more. 10 years ago, there was more.
Mhm.
But we are still having more than 290 in a year if you look back at this year. I mean, I've been here since 2017, and we had more babies that year. I know.
I don't know, I know many people who homeschooled during COVID, but outside of those circumstances, I don't know many people who homeschool. So do you guys? I mean, where are we losing enrollment?
I mean, I know a lot of people who homeschooled but then re-enrolled
Yeah,
already.
that's what I mean. I mean, like outside of COVID circumstances, where are we losing our families?
I mean, this might not be the best time to bring this up, but it's just, I know that we have some outreach specialists. We have some people in the district that do outreach, and they try to go and target those families that potentially don't have the resources or don't know that we're having kindergarten roundup. They don't get those letters, or they don't see it on Facebook. But really, there's just a lot of opportunities for outreach, and maybe at the back to school night that the chamber and the school district are hosting together, maybe we do something there too, so just
Yeah.
creativity.
Well, we do also, the hospital catches from a much larger area too, right?
Yeah.
Like we get patients from Connell and, well, Royal City's not Adams County, but we get Moses Lake people come down and have babies with us just because we're a smaller, more intimate setting too. But those kids and like the Warden kids, they go to school there, they don't come to our
Yeah.
district because they're not from here. So you're not gonna catch 100% of every baby that gets born at our hospital.
That's true.
We were participating in a statewide update a few months ago, and what they're noticing across Washington is particularly in K2, a decrease in enrollment. That's where the biggest hits are. And for most of those kids, it's because we don't have compulsory attendance when you're that young. And so many families who are working remotely are choosing to keep their kids home until 2nd or 3rd grade. So they're waiting to see if those kids are going to show up then. Maybe that's happening in our community, but I'm not sure. I know we did run an extra kinder roundup this year because we were so concerned about that number, but we can, put that message out again and see if we get a few more bodies.
Are we having decreasing people come to like the ready for kinder classes and nights and that kind of stuff?
No,
Are
I
those things
think
still
everyone
happening and
was-
as robust as they were?
Yeah, we were just a bit surprised by the number. You just got used to that. for a while there, it was, we were always expecting near 400, right? And then that bubble worked its way through.
Okay, so the next slide shows our fund balance on each account, on each fund. So a fund balance is our actual cash. So to get cash is you get your beginning projected fund balance, and then you get your revenues and expenditures, and then it'll either decrease or increase your fund balance depending on the excess or the overage. So in the general fund, I projected our beginning fund balance to be 13,706,000. And what I do there is I get like our fund balance in May and try to determine, okay, I'm expecting this much more in grants and apportionment, and these are our expected expenses, and then trying to figure out what I think our fund balance is going to be, and then project out what the ending fund balance for the coming year will be. So I did that for every fund, and it's listed there. With the transfer, you will see that our ending fund balance in our general fund is 10,756,000. In the next slide, I wanted to compare this year's budget to last year's budget. And one of the things that you'll probably notice that they're about the same as far as the revenue, total revenues and total expenditures. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure you understood is that last year we budgeted the full amount of our ESSER money in case we used it. So we didn't know how much of it we used, so we budgeted for the full, for all of it. And then this, the amount that we budgeted this year is our actual amount that we have left over. So, another thing too is in the capital projects. Last year, the big capital project stuff was budgeted in the general fund, and this year they're being budgeted in the capital projects. So last year I did the budget in the general fund because that's where we were going to get the COVID grants. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the general fund in more detail. So where do we get our revenues? I have them listed out there. So it's comparing what I'm projecting for this year and then what our budget was for last year. You will notice that our state general purpose is going up 2.76%, and that's because of the IPD increase. And then the state special purpose, that one's going up 2.6, and that's special ed. A lot of it's special ed funding. And then the federal programs is going down because of the ESSER amounts being less. So in the next slide, it tells you what all those revenue sources are. Okay, and then in the next slide, wanted to point out our staff changes. So you will see the three big groups: the administrative, certificated, and classified. And then I listed if we eliminated or had new positions. The net decrease to the overall budget because of the elimination of some of the positions was $633,000, including benefits. And then in the next slide, this one's new for this school year. I just kind of wanted to point out where our staff is funded from. So in the first one, you can see our program, Basic Education. We have 231 employees funded from Basic Education. and 33 classified. We do have about the same amount of classified people, about 325 people. I think it's almost about the same. But a lot of our classified staff are not full-time employees. Here's where you'll see, Talia, that we have 8.4 positions being funded out of ESSER this school year. Total? Mm-hmm.
So including K3, just the, in our total,
Yes, it's K3 and some fourth grade teachers.
okay. Does that also include any counselors, anything like that?
They're not paid out of ESSER, they're paid out of basic ed.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
So maybe today's not the day, but I'm curious to know how many people we pay as a district that are not reimbursed by the state. Does that make sense?
Okay, so are unfunded.
Or unfunded, how many people we pay unfunded?
I
At
have
some
that
point.
information for the current school year, but I haven't done it for the following school year, so I can do that.
Okay, it's
What-
nothing I
you
need
have
to
a
know.
Ballpark idea for last year? A percentage or a number of people?
Not without looking, I wouldn't want to say. I'm more of a visual person, I have it
20%?
a lot.
Okay, I'm just curious as to what we're paying, what we're
I think I did
paying.
that whole analysis when we were going through negotiations, so I
Yeah.
have that information somewhere.
I've heard you say it before, I just couldn't remember what it was, but as our can is no longer being able to be kicked,
Mhm.
that's getting a little bit more, I don't know, on the forefront of my mind.
And that
So-
staff is paid through our levy, right?
Correct. Our levy and Leah, we always have to include that, because that's, our levy doesn't, if we get 5 million in Leah and then 3 million from levy, so,
Leah is what, again?
the equalization, I had it written down. It's the local equalization money. The state gives us that money if we pass the levy.
Oh, okay. So they give us funds, but if we don't pass the levy, we lose our local funds and we lose Leah.
Correct.
Okay.
Local equalization.
Is it local effort assistance?
Local effort assistance. There you go. Okay, in the next slide, every expenditure from our district is always coded by 4 major things. It's by the program, by the activity, by the object, and its location. We're not gonna get into the details of the location, but I wanted to bring information of how we're paying it by those other 3. So the first this slide is about objects and where we're spending it. So, and it's being compared to last year's budget. So our certificated, for example, our certificated salaries are being budgeted at 30.3 million. Last year, it was 28.8 million. So those are the, and our salaries and benefits are 75% of our total budget. Something that sorry, back to that slide, something that I separated this year too, and I kind of want to, it's a little different from last year, is that last year, the certificated salaries and the admin salaries were together because they both come under certificated, but I separated them out this year so that you can see the increase from the actual teaching salaries and the actual increase from the admin salaries. The next slide is by object, excluding ESSER. So what would our budget look like if we didn't have the ESSER funding? I think that's important because next year it won't have it, and you're gonna, what would it look like? So this year, without ESSER funding, our budget would have been 83 million, And last year's budget without ESSER would have been 77 million. Okay. And then on the flip side of that one, where are we budgeting our ESSER dollars this coming year? So this year's ESSER budget is 4.4 million, and we're gonna plan on spending it in those categories. And then in the next slide,
Really quick, Amy.
uh-huh.
Purchased services. Could you give me an example of what that means? Is that
Those are
Consultants.
contracts that we pay.
okay?
You want to say? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
The capital outlay, the $1 million that we put there is most likely to be used for technology. It's just that's what, unless we want to pivot and spend it somewhere else.
'Kay.
For now, that's what we're planning. And also under the ESSER budget, if you see the certified salaries and the classified salaries, the classified salaries are probably summer school, but the certified salaries are mostly the K-3 specialists and the 4th grade teachers. That would have been BEA money. The next slide is just comparing this year's budget to the previous 5 years, in case, you know, if anybody's interested in that. The second column, the 22-23 actual, if you guys remember, we budgeted 87.6 million, but we're actually probably only gonna spend about 79. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. And then for percentages, it's the same information, but this is on just percentages. So you can say that in 23-24, we're spending 38.72% on certified salaries, and compare that to what it was in previous years. Any questions on that? Okay. And then this one's by activity. This is, I think I said it last year, but OSPI tells us that this is what they look like where the activity. So this is what they're looking at. So you can see this year's expenses compared to last year's, and just kind of where the numbers are changing. I think the big one on this one, that I had to go back and make a change after the ESD reviewed my budget. I had to go in there and increase insurance from 515,000 to 731, because it's going up 33%.
Mm-hmm. That's same for my business.
Yeah, we're not, 3.7% is not keeping up.
Yeah.
And then this one is the expenditures by program. So you have the regular, federal, special education, and VOC. And then the next slide shows what those are. Any questions on that? And then the next slide is our change to ending fund balance. Compared to last year's budget and the previous year's actual. So here you can see that our beginning fund balance is budgeted almost as the same, but because of the transfer, our ending fund balance will be a little less. And then why is that ending fund balance important? We need to have financial stability. We need a reserve for emergencies. It gives us higher bond rating and appropriate cash flow, because a lot of our grants, we have to spend first and then seek reimbursement. And you gotta make sure you have that fund balance in there to help with that. We're not having to stop payroll or something to make our bills. Okay, so the next one's a closer look at what is in fund balance. So this one, so we can say that our cash balance is 10.7 million at the end of 23-24, but it's not really all money that can be spent. So we do have to have our 10% minimum fund balance of 8.7 in there. And then the first one is restricted for carryover. So there's some grants, like LAP, High Poverty, SPED, and CTE. If you don't spend what the state gives you for that program that year, you're allowed to carry it over, but we gotta make sure we keep that money in fund balance, because then it's just, we wouldn't have the money to fund it to the following year if we didn't keep it. We do have, in 870, in GL 870, we do have $298,000 still remaining in there from the board in 15-16 set some money aside for technology, and we haven't spent it the last several years because COVID's been able to help us with that. So it's still sitting there as a reserve. Last year, I put 2.6 million in the assigned to contingencies for infrastructure negotiation cost, and I'm dropping that to 1 million because I think we have already absorbed some of those costs. And then if you can notice, so what's left after all that, it's only $75,000 of unassigned fund balance. So ESSER impact, how did it support the work in 21 and 22 and the 22-23 school year? This is what we use our ESSER mostly on. The subfloaters, the K-3 instructional specialists, 4th and 5th grade teachers, technology, professional development, summer school, items like what Jessica said, like professional development to address learning loss, and then the stipends. How will we continue to do it in 23-24? K-3 instructional specialists, 4th grade classroom teachers, summer school. We'll have some in indirects, technology, and then the transfer for the capital project items that we're working on. So just wanted to point out that we did leverage our dollars to do more for students and provide OSD the ability to complete some capital projects.
Amy, is that summer school that is just happened or summer school for next summer?
So the money that we have now is for the one that we just did, and we still have some in the 20% learning loss COVID for next summer school.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a new slide this year because I wanted you guys to see how did ESSER help us in what impact did it have in our payroll. So what I have here is the money that would have come out of basic ed and therefore out of our fund balance had we not had ESSER. So because we had ESSER, we wanted to point out the ESSER cliff was prevented another year. So what I mean by that, so if our fund balance today would have been $15 million, it would have probably been more like 10 million, because all these teachers that were being paid out of basic ed are now being pivoted and paid out of ESSER.
I was able to find a previously shared document that Amy and the finance team worked on, and I found 72 unfunded positions.
Sounds about right.
Wow.
This slide, I got it from the WASBO Business Managers, and it's just a slide that's been shared out to districts about the COVID and the COVID ESSER dollars and the impacts that it's done. The bottom of it, I know it's small, but if you see in 22-23, there was loss in that year, but because of ESSER, it kept the bar up, right? So, so the green, if you follow the ESSER, you know, it kept the numbers up. It kept everybody okay, most everybody. And then the ESSER cliff is coming, and then they're saying that in 24, 25, when the money's gone, they called it the bloodletting. Just kind of thought that was interesting. I mean, a lot of things was, you know, we still had the inflationary raises and the commitments. We had the enrollment effects, and then whatever the state did with their money, and then the net impact. So. And then this is a required statement of MSOC. Like I said, that's material supplies and operating costs. The state allocates us 6.4 million, and we're actually going to spend about 9.8 million. And that's in program, basic ed program, and 97, which is district-wide. This is not including those costs out of our grants. And then the future, the 4-year forecast. What is our enrollment going to do in the next 4 years? A lot of it's going to depend on our kinder enrollment. For this one, I still increased our kinder by 10 each year, hoping that that's what it's going to be like. We'll know more once we get our true numbers. So this decrease in students could actually be worse, depending on where we land with our kindergartners. I don't know if you guys saw the little star down there, said that our district graduating class sizes are larger than our projected kindergarten classes. And that hasn't been the case.
I had read something that both in the US and in Japan, death rates are higher than birth rates. So this might not be a problem. It's going to get better. I don't know.
This one is just what's our fund balance going to do in the next 4 years, starting with the current year. Just kind of wanted to point out that by 26, 27, it's barely enough for 10% board policy to keep 10% of our reserve.
Okay. I don't know if this is the right time to ask this question, but if we can't afford to fill positions when as people resign, are we obligated in our teacher contracts that we have to employ a certain amount of teachers each year to like fill positions? Or was that part of our contract when we negotiated, is like, oh, we will pay X amount of full-time employees a year?
No, it's the FTE is really driven by student count. So
Okay.
there's an expectation that as that changes, then the number of positions needed would change. This last summer, we got into a conversation with OEA about a couple of positions that we just didn't need anymore. They were very cooperative and partnered with us and collaborated and found a good solution for everyone involved. The larger that number gets, so if you think of it in terms of cuts, the more dominoes that have to be moved around and thought about. So we're going to have to partner with OEA around those kinds of conversations. You know, we'll go to our principals and say, what do you need to get the work done? Okay, here's what we can afford. Here's what makes sense. And then sit down with the association and talk about, you know, how we might adjust staffing levels. But
Okay.
it's going to be driven by student count. And I think you could see now the commitment has been to overspend what the state provides and says is basic ed because we think we need it. But if it's not at a sustainable level anymore, you have to change course.
Yeah. So even with that, the ESSER cliff that's coming, is it still going to be driven by student enrollment, or are we going to have to make cuts before that because of this ESSER cliff that's coming?
Yeah, we'll have to do it either way, because like Amy shared in the slide, where if you'll go back to the one with all of the lines and the colorful arrows, the blue and green one,
Yeah, on 42.
that one. ESSER was the lifeline for folks, that green line, but those other categories about the economic slowdown and inflationary rises in commitments to expended staff roles and costs, that's getting people as well. It's just getting, like you indicated, it's getting more expensive to do business. And we have to be, if the state's not going to send that money on through to us, we have to adjust our staffing levels.
Cost of fuel's going up, insurance is
Yeah.
going up, and it's going up by more than what the state's giving us, you know. One of the things I wanted to point out in that slide 46 was what I do with the revenues and the expenditures is that I adjust them by the IPD factor that we're thinking is gonna come down. So the only numbers that I have right now is that for 24-25, it'll be 3.9% is what they're expecting, and then they think maybe 2.4 and then 1.9, but those are, you know, they're not, those could change. So in this slide, just kind of where the revenue's coming and where the expenditures are coming in the next 4 years. So you can see that next year's, it'll be lower than this year's budget. And then because of the IPD, it'll go back up the previous year, the next following year. And then the next several slides are just the smaller funds. The ASB, not much change. The debt service. The capital projects. This one does list out what we're gonna use the $3 million on and the amounts we're expecting. Just wanna, if we stay within those numbers, we should have 332,000 at the end of the school year. But keep in mind that that doesn't fund very many big major things that might happen. So we always have to keep thinking, okay, how are we gonna continue to put money into our capital projects for asphalt repairs or roof repairs, or you never know what could happen.
Yeah.
So depending on what this school year does, I might continue to ask for, you know, transfers every year for an emergency for capital projects. Then the next one's the vehicle fund. And then the next step then will be on August 28th, we'll have the budget hearing and then board adoption before I send it off to the OSPI. A lot of information.
A ton of information. Does anybody have any questions? I had a couple, I think just one actually. I saw in one of the budget line items, it included after-school programs. Is that something that we're gonna be doing in maybe Pete, this is more a question for you, in 20, what year are we in? 23, 24, sorry, too many numbers.
Yeah, there have been some conversations internally about the effectiveness of summer school in particular, and are there ways to consider those funds, and are we getting the outcomes we want for that return on investment, I guess is what it comes down to. And is there a more effective way to do it? So I know that Jessica and the teaching and learning team have been thinking about how could we adjust that and make it more meaningful.
Okay. Okay. I don't know how to transition.
I'll try and transition just by one phrase.
Sorry.
You know, we shared with the administrators this idea of urgency, and let's get things going, right? Let's keep the pressure on. And then you have a presentation like this where it's, how are you going to do that without the funding? What I've been thinking about in this space, and I used to say it in school sometimes, it's let's be third. That means let's let someone else figure out and then kind of come behind them. That's where we're at with this. Because there are a number of districts that are ahead of us with decreases in FTE and escalating costs, and they're cutting this year and cutting next year. And we'll be able to learn from them. And I think that our associations will be able to learn from them, and the messaging will spread across the state, and we'll do it as seamlessly as we can. Obviously, there will be some discomfort for folks, but we're all dealing with it across Washington, and I think we're in an okay spot. So I think we should feel that's about it, just kind of okay. Really good work, really well prepared, really thoughtful, and let's not get too shook up yet until we see what comes out.
Okay. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Amy, and your team for all of your guys' hard work. I mean, this is 50 pages of work just for a presentation for us. So that's a ton. Thank you so much for all of your effort and all of your hard work. Moving on to E1, policy review. It looks like we've got a first reading on a couple of DOPs. If anybody has any issues, you've got until next meeting to get those to Pete or Marisa. And moving on to F1, upcoming events. School is right around the corner. What on our list of upcoming events are we needing to be at? All staff orientation. Are you wanting us there? Do you want us to come just for lunch? What do you?
Yeah, I think we'd certainly love to have you there. The presentation that starts at 10:30 and is going to be repeated at 1 p.m. It's going to be the same one, just a different audience. So if you could only make one of those events, that's where the choice you'd have to make. If you wanted to be there for lunch, we're serving lunch from 11:30 to 12:30. So if I was thinking about my schedule as a board member, if I was there from 10 to 12:30, that would be a full day, and you would see all the components.
Okay.
And you're all welcome. We'd certainly love to have you.
Okay. So that's on the
Also,
29th.
but the morning of the new teacher, right? The new teacher orientation as well on Monday morning?
Yeah, so the 29th is the all staff. The 28th is the new teacher. Do you want us at both of those? Or just all staff?
I think we'd like to have you at both of them if possible.
Okay. Is it a similar?
The new teacher orientation will be a lot less formal, no presentation really. It'll just be an opportunity for us to stand up and introduce you. There's going to be a breakfast and a lunch opportunity with them, but it would just be a name and a face for you to introduce yourself to the new staff.
Okay. Would you prefer us there at the breakfast time or at lunchtime? I mean,
Probably breakfast.
breakfast?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so beginning of the day on the 28th for us at DOHS, and then we have a special meeting that night at 6:30, which no one ever shows up for. So that'll be 5 minutes, hopefully. And then we have a regular scheduled board meeting that night. And then the next day will be the all-staff orientation. And then, ready or not, we start school. Okay, moving on to board self-assessment.
I think we got a lot of really great information today, both from the schools and where they're at from earlier, like we talked about, and then the budget information as far as I think we're in an okay spot for this year, but we have some really sobering things coming in the next couple of years, and to know about that now and not have it be a surprise at this time next year is a much better place to be
Yeah.
in, I think.
Definitely missed having Ken here.
I think you did a great job.
Sorry for the fumbles, guys. great presentation from Amy and her team.
It's also nice to have Jaden back today.
Yep.
I appreciated the detailed, like, kind of like the abbreviations or a little bit more where like you did the, what's it called? The lingo, but then you put kind of a little bit more information as what we're gonna see in the presentation.
Yes.
I think that that's really appreciated because we might understand what you're talking about, but the community doesn't. And so if they pull up the presentation without listening to the audio, I feel like it kind of gives them a good picture of what was discussed at the meeting. So that's really great.
It was very helpful for me as well. Like, even in person with the presentation, it was very much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, and I will say, I looked at this on yesterday when I was looking through the meeting stuff, and it was way more clear today
Yeah.
than when I tried to look through myself.
Same.
I just had to kind of put it away and know that it was gonna make a lot more sense today. But the legend of all the lingo was extremely helpful
Yeah.
for me as well.
Same. Very well-planned agenda. Sharon, you haven't said that for like 4 meetings. What's going on? Okay, if, Pete, do you have anything to add?
I think it's a significant commitment by the board. It was a long day for you all today, so appreciate your time and attention. And thanks for sticking in there through 2 long sessions, so thanks.
Marisa, thank you for lunch.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for lunch. It was delicious. All right, well, if anything else? Okay, this meeting is adjourned.